One small correction about the use of the word Lord in the Old Testament and in the New Testament doesn't dramatically affect what I had to say, but I should make this correction. So, the Old Testament has, the word Elohim, which basically is a Hebrew word that means like some sort of divine being. Like it doesn't have to mean the God. It can mean a God, but they use that to refer to the God too. But it also has the word Adonai, which basically translates to like Lord, and then it has Yahweh, which is like God's name. So when the Old Testament was translated into Greek in the Septuagint, Elohim was translated into the Greek theos, which means God. It's the Greek word for God, any sort of God. I don't know what they did with Adonai, but I know that Yahweh was actually translated as Kurios. So, which is the Greek word that means Lord, and in our modern English Bibles, we do a similar thing. We translate Adonai as Lord with lowercase letters, and then Yahweh is translated as Lord with all caps. So, at any rate, the point is that they use Kurios becomes the standard word for Jesus in the New Testament, which raises an implication about, like in Corinthians they say there's one God or one theos and one Lord, one Kurios. So anyway, that's that little point there. To Mark 13:32 and Matthew. Mark 13:32 is interesting because I read an article by a Jewish rabbi that claimed that Jesus never claimed to be God, and on the basis of this passage. Okay, so the problem with that rabbi is that Jesus, he doesn't seem to understand Jesus claimed things ambiguously about himself, built up to this radical claim at the crucifixion. God raises him from the dead, and then he teaches the apostles more. And these early followers of Jesus are our only source of information for Jesus' teaching anyway, our only real one. Okay, so Mark 13:32, he talks about the end of the world, and when the Son of Man himself will return in the clouds with great power and glory. He will send the angels to gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. And he says, but about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. Okay, so, the thing is, in this passage, Jesus is talking about himself as Son of Man. And the same passage is repeated again in Matthew 24:36 through 41, where Jesus, even in this, the next verse, he says, he calls himself Son of Man. And we'll talk about the Son of Man thing anyway, but in a minute. But the key here is that he's saying that himself, he's presenting a scale where he's putting himself even above the angels in his relationship with God. So that's a blasphemous claim if it's not true. Okay? The true follower of God, if he's claiming to be beyond all human prophets, even beyond angels, to be some sort of supernatural divine being, there's more than one way to take it, but he's clearly claiming something incredible about himself. Okay? Then we get the trial. And at the trial, Jesus is asked, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? Okay, so Messiah and Son of God are connected here by, I think the chief priest, I can't remember his name, Caiaphas, I think is his name. It's a little bit confusing because there's the previous chief priest and anyway, Jesus answers by connecting those titles to the Son of Man. the Son of Man is his favorite thing to call himself. It's agreed on by historians just in general that like Jesus called himself Son of Man. It's even in this passage, like from Matthew here that we didn't talk about. I just made a reference to, but let's take a Matthew 24:31. I got Mark 24. That's not going to do it. Well, now I just really blew it. All right, so Matthew 24:31. We'll start in verse 30. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds. It's the same thing. All right. Okay, and from one end of the earth to the other. All right, so 36. I'm supposed to go to 36. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, and up to the day that Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So, here's the thing. This passage where Jesus actually says there's something he doesn't know is actually another embarrassing point for later Christian, like New Testament, Christian stuff where they're saying Jesus is in very nature God. They considered equality with God something not to be grasped, but stoop down to our level. The way that they uplift Jesus in the New Testament makes this statement of Jesus very embarrassing for them, which means that he probably said it, and that's why they had to record him as saying it, because he did say it. Okay, so in this passage that he said, historically, it's historically proven that he did say it, then he is calling himself the Son of Man. So I just wanted to give that to you. But it's so prevalent in everything that they say in the Gospels about Jesus. It's clear that, they didn't use that terminology for Jesus. It's just dissimilar. Like, they didn't use that terminology for Jesus after he died and resurrected. Jesus talked about himself that way. He called himself the Son of Man. Okay, but then you get to the trial, and he's asked, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? And he says, I am, and you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with glory. Okay, so let's look at, what is it, Mark 15, I believe. And Jesus before Pilate. Okay, no, we went too far. We got to go to Mark 14. Okay. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Okay. That would be God, by the way. All right. I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? Okay. Also in Luke, was it Luke 24? Went one chapter too many. Okay. One more. Back. We got to go to 22. There it is. All right. Now, where is the trial? He's arrested. Oh, I'm bouncing around. Oh, I don't see it in here. Where is that in Luke? Sure, it's in here. Here I am blowing it. All right, Last Supper. Jesus prays on the Mount of Olives. All right. Peter denies Jesus. Oh, here it is. How did I miss it? I feel so ashamed now. At daybreak, the council, this is the very end of Luke 22. At daybreak, the council of elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was before them. If you are the Messiah, they said, tell us. Jesus answered, if I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. They all asked, are you then the Son of God? He replied, you say that. I am. All right, so similar thing. So this is a reference to Daniel 7, which I do know. This is a prophecy from Daniel 7. So Jesus claims to be the Son of Man from Daniel 7. They all these guys devoted their lives to studying the Old Testament, so they know exactly what he's talking about. All right, and so then we've got Daniel 7, the exact reference, 13, 14. I took notes. Okay. Daniel says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. So this was an Old Testament image that referred to Yahweh as the cloud rider. And where that comes from is the other Canaanite or Western Semitic people, their chief god was this god Baal. And what we know from archaeology is most likely, and what the Old Testament says, is that the Israelites also worship Baal, even though they weren't supposed to. And so eventually they got away from Baal worship. But the Bible disrespects Baal and puts Baal down. And so one of the terms that is used to talk about Baal's greatness by the Assyrians and, by the Phoenicians and the other Canaanites is that, like, Baal is the cloud rider. He rides on clouds. And that's that becomes a term that signifies him as their highest god. So then the Old Testament flips that around and calls Yahweh the cloud rider, which is basically like a big, y'all are losers, our God's better, So it becomes just a terminology, who's the real cloud rider, okay? But then Daniel says he sees the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, that's Yahweh, and was led into his presence. Okay, and then God himself, the very God, gives the Son of Man, who Jesus is claiming he is. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. And that raises serious questions about what is Jesus exactly. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. Dominion, as in, it's Latin. It comes into us in English. It means the dominator, the one who dominates. It means kingdom, rule, or authority. Okay? And it even says, here, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So he's going to have everlasting rule over everything, given to him by God. Authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. So, this is a blasphemous claim if it's not true. So, given that Jesus did say this, because it's one of these Son of Man statements, he said this, and you can see why he would have been crucified for this. We've talked about in another video that he definitely was crucified, and here's a perfectly plausible reason why the Jews would crucify him. So C.S. Lewis's trilemma, works in this case. Again, hopefully I've made the point about how the doctrine of the Trinity formed. We've got Jesus revealing a lot about himself before the crucifixion, but he seems to clearly reveal more about himself after, or rather he makes sure the apostles get it, and it seems like the resurrection kind of is like it's like a punch in the face or a slap in the face or a knock in the head to get them to start listening to Jesus maybe. But either way, that's when they get it. He teaches them after the resurrection, and then we have all of these truths that they bring us, including the truths about what Jesus said before he resurrected. And then we have debates among Christians about some sort of theological system, or rather a Christological system that fits all of these truths. and you go all over the place waffling back and forth, and most of the time it's not really, here's the correct view. It's more like, here's this view, well, it's got this flaw. Well, here's this view, well, it's got this flaw. And we keep coming up with less and less incorrect views and no real certain idea on what exactly the correct view is. And the reason is, God would, of course, be difficult to understand. And so why would we think that it's easy to understand God? Of course, understanding the relationship between Christ and God is going to be difficult. There's no problem with it. God would have to be one in one sense and three in another sense, but exactly what those senses are is difficult to understand. So anyway, there's that little video. I just would add that the Trinity is sometimes seen by Christians as a point of embarrassment, that we should be embarrassed that we believe this. I do not think that's correct. I think that there are theological problems with any idea of God that's what's called monism. There are some Christians who ascribe to this, and they say that Jesus is just a metaphor. To this day, liberal Christians say it's just one God, and the whole story of Jesus is just a metaphor. The problem is he clearly claimed these radical things about himself, so you can't wave him off as just a good moral teacher. You can't wave him off as like just this metaphor. I mean, he definitely said this stuff. There definitely was a person, Jesus, who definitely said this stuff, and we can prove historically that God raised him from the dead. Then that liberal theology stuff doesn't work just based on what we know about history. So like, and the Muslims they have a monistic view of God too, where it's no Trinity, it's just one being. The one problem with that is that you wind up with a God who like needs us, because God is love, as 1 John 4 says. So like, it would seem like, well, who's God loving before he creates us? It seems like we complete God in a way. But in the concept of the Trinity, you have a community within the Godhead where God is complete in himself, and he is sufficient, or really I say that that's the idea, the divine attribute of aseity, that God is completely sufficient, self-sufficient, and needs us for nothing. That everything that God does for us is for our benefit, not for his. So that God has this perfect relationship within himself. All right, so anyway, that being said, we'll let it go for now. Thank you so much for being patient and sitting through this video. We have probably one more section to do that I need to record to finish this whole Introduction to Apologetics series, assuming that this thing that I just recorded tonight isn't flawed, but everything is fine so far, and I will be so excited when this is done. Thank you. Have a good night.